I'm Fenork.
And I'm Swamp Goblin.
And we're here to discuss a classic AD&D module from 1982.
Against the cult of the Reptile God.
So, Dungeon Module N1.
Against the cult of the Reptile God.
That's it.
Classic.
Yeah.
My favourite.
Right, well, you've GM'd it,
Yeah.
and I never have, but I did play in it back, well, I can't remember when, but it was soon after it came out, so I guess it would have been 1982, 1983, for I am old. And so I've seen it from a player's viewpoint, you've seen it from a GM's viewpoint. We should probably give a bit of background.
Yeah. I mean, I ran it in 2017
Right.
with a group of my friends.
Yeah.
And it was an experience.
Yeah.
Because absolutely nothing went according to plan.
Right, this says that it's supposed to be for 4 to 7 characters, a first through third level. It's as if it's a novice module for first-time players. And yours were first-timers?
Yeah, they were. Yeah. So we did a brief introductory scenario before that, a couple of danger rooms, that kind of thing, to get them used to actually taking their turns and the kind of aspects of the game. But they were pretty much out-of-the-box players. They'd had an interest in the hobby, but never really done anything with it.
Yeah. So we'll return probably to what happened when you ran it.
Come on later, because it's a hell of a ride.
Okay. Well, let's just look at the intro to this. I'll read it out. Terror by night. The village of Orlane is dying. Once a small and thriving community, Orlane has become a maze of locked doors and frightened faces. Strangers are shunned. Trade has withered. Rumours flourish, growing wilder with each retelling. Terrified peasants flee their homes, abandoning their farms with no explanation. Others simply disappear. No one seems to know the cause of the decay. Why are there no clues? Who skulks through the twisted shadows of the night? Who or what is behind the doom that has overtaken the village? It will take a brave and skillful band of adventurers to solve the dark riddle of Orlane. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great piece. That's a great introduction. That gives you a great setup. It gives you a mystery. I mean, it's called Against the Cult of the Reptile God, but you probably shouldn't tell your players that. It's more fun if you, it's more fun if you don't, really.
Right.
But yeah, that's a great setup because there is, a central village, Orlane. Yeah. There's some horrific things that are going on.
Yeah.
And it's up to you players to discover that.
We could put that into a bit of context in a way. This is 1982. 3 years earlier, Gary Gygax had put out The Village of Hamlet adventure module, which had stood, and in some people's minds still does stand, as the definitive, here's a village, go into it and meet the people, and befriend some and make enemies of others, and gather clues and rumours, and then make a journey to a nearby dungeon and keep going back to the village when you need to rest up. And this comprehensively subverts that.
It does and it doesn't, because Hamlet is a fantastic village, right? But it is just that. That's all it is. It's a sandbox village for characters to go to and then leave and do something else. Whereas the village in this, as well as being a comprehensive, good village, a realistic one, the adventure takes place within it. You've got 2 little mini dungeons in the village itself, and then you go out to do the big one.
And the village is itself the problem.
Yeah.
You have to investigate.
Or rather the citizenry. And that throws into all kinds of weird, sharp lights.
Right.
Yeah. The map itself is great for the village. Just like Hamlet, it feels like a realistic sort of place, really.
We'll come on to the village in a moment. Just let's finish off the background by saying something about the personnel here. We've got Douglas Niles as the author. Now, I did a bit of research. And Niles is a man after my own heart because he was an English teacher, who was teaching in a high school just 30 miles from Lake Geneva. One of his students comes up to him and says, could she be excused his lesson because she has to go and be interviewed by People magazine? And he, of course, says, why does People magazine want to interview you, Heidi? And she says, well, my dad created Dungeons and Dragons. For this was Heidi Gygax, who was his student. Yeah, right.
That's pretty cool. That's a great introduction.
Yeah, right. So he gets the D&D bug off his students and buys a set at her, recommendation, starts playing it with his friends. Then, and this is how it always goes with English teachers, one of his players has to leave the campaign because he's gone and gotten a job with Dragon magazine. And Douglas Niles is finally starting to think, wouldn't I rather be doing Dungeons and Dragons for a job than being an English teacher? And I've thought this many times.
Yeah. I mean, how many of us have thought of jacking everything in?
Exactly.
And starting this romantic lifestyle, writing, playing, GMing.
Yeah. But TSR was hiring and he lived just down the road. So he gets a job there as a designer. And this was his first gig. He was given the remit of this very brief scenario idea called The Cult of the Reptile God. And I think they were expecting him just to do a standard, here is a dungeon where this cult is based, go in there and give them Marielle. And instead he came up with this thing in 4 weeks. He wrote this in 4 weeks, yeah. And we might come back to perhaps how one or two issues in this module do betray its
the short time frame, the short development time frame, yeah.
But anyway, that's Douglas Niles, and something about the art. We've got the front cover there, which I adore, by Tim Truman, who manages to make stuff that looks like oil paintings, and it just pops with kind of motion, doesn't it? And the light blazing from the wizard's staff, and the reptile people. What are they? Trogs?
They're troglodytes. But the cool thing about this piece is it's a scene from the second or third to last room of the dungeon.
Because it's the eggs.
Yeah,
right.
the viper eggs. So this actually, is an actual room. Yeah. That's what I love about these pieces of art, is that they reflect an encounter that you're going to find.
Yeah. Again, don't show it to your players. Though.
Yeah, don't show it to your players. Right. That's a bad idea. Yeah. Never show your players anything.
Yeah. We used to use these card screens around modules as DM screens to rather give stuff away. Truman's got some lovely stuff inside as well. There's a kind of picture on the inside cover of a trog, giving you a look, which, I don't know, I've seen my cats look at me like that occasionally. But again, it's full of brooding menace. He went on to do a lot of work with Dark Horse Comics, and is a very talented musician as well.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, because I love that piece as well. I love it. The thing that really stands out to me is that right hand clutching that makeshift spear.
Yes.
Look at the knuckles and the tension, the definition.
Yeah. Although the spear looks a little slender. But
well, they're not master craftsmen.
Okay, right, they're just trogs. But there's another artist at work here, and you're going to say something about this.
Oh yeah, I love this piece.
This is Jim Holloway, by the way, the other contributing artist inside. Carry on.
Yeah, so this is a great piece, and it's always stuck with me because you're not entirely sure what it's depicting. You could think it's the constable of the village, taking the adventurers and giving them the sort of runaround and the whole spiel as to what he will and won't accept in this town, or it's just a bunch of adventurers stood outside a small village, armed to the teeth, looking like raiders or bandits. But I don't think players quite view themselves like this.
Perhaps not. There is a little description for beginning the adventure, which describes the journey you've made across the realm of Grand March, and says, at the outskirts of Orlane, a large group of elms is visible to the left, while several wooden buildings border the road to the right. And this does seem then to be you arriving at the village as adventurers. Now, I'm going to say, I agree with you. This is a great scene-setting piece. This is the players themselves turning up at the village for the first time, we can imagine. I'm going to disagree with you, though. Jim Holloway, his art turned up in a lot of 80s TSR stuff, sometimes to great effect in The Horror on the Hill, and that one that I've suddenly forgotten the name of about a a lost city, might even be called the Lost City, underneath a pyramid in the desert. And he's got a great kind of cartoony sort of art style in many ways. He's particularly good at comedy.
We've got another scene later in this with the players in the inn itself being captured by the troglodytes.
That's right.
I must say, I loathe that piece of art. I hate it so much.
I know. I mean,
it's awful.
Would you show that to your players, saying this is what's happening to you?
Especially the guy with the blanket or the sack over his head. That face, what is that all about? It's like the Shroud of Turin's been draped over him.
Yeah. But I think that his art style worked on Horror on the Hill, which is a basic D&D module with a sort of fairy tale quality to it in many ways. And this sort of style really sold that. Here, with the brooding, rather sinister horror of the premise, and with Truman's cover art, it doesn't seem to mesh as well.
No, it really doesn't marry the dark, insidious content of the adventure.
Yeah.
Like, when you look at this piece, you think you're in for a bit of a fun house jaunt.
Yeah.
Rather than anything a bit more serious and higher brow, which I think is what the module's really about.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's have a talk about Orlane then, because here we have the classic village setting.
You've got everything that you'd sort of need from the map. You know, you've got all the places of interest that you need, all the different buildings, and it feels alive. You know, it doesn't feel stagnant or dead, which is actually what the community sort of is.
So TSR had cranked out quite a few villages, and other fantasy campaigns had done the same. They'd often had a tendency in the early days of D&D to load these places up with high-level characters.
Yeah.
10th level fighter working in the bakery and all this sort of thing. And it's, and this place doesn't do that. I think you've got a retired ranger, haven't you?
You've got a couple. Yeah. So you've got the antagonists. You know, there's a few high-level dudes in there because it wouldn't be much of an adventure without, stiff opposition.
Yeah.
You've got the retired ranger.
He's living there with his wife and children. He's retired from adventuring. Yeah. He's got a nice little house. Yeah.
But you've got a pair of elves in the village. They're not too shabby. And a lot of the other characters, the antagonist,
the mayor's bodyguard.
The mayor's bodyguard.
I always think of as having a metal plate in his head or something. He's this kind of...
he comes raging into the room.
Big kind of Jaws character that just is lurking nearby and will rush out and crack skulls if you mess with his boss.
Yeah, I like that. And but the constable and they've got +1 weapons. Most of those guys are rolling around with +1 weapons. You don't get any in this adventure, which will become a problem later.
Yes.
And we'll address that when we get to it.
You must remember to loot the corpses, that's for sure.
And
this does lead to a problem about just how you're supposed to interact with the villagers. But let's just stick with the village itself for a moment.
Yeah.
We've got this lovely map. And I've got to say, whenever I see TSR village maps, I sort of think that, Gary Gygax and in this case Doug Niles have just taken the kind of Wisconsin suburban paradise and imagined it's 1,000 years ago or something. You've got this neatly laid out sort of ground plan of very kind of regular oblong houses, all with their own little patches and gardens and everything.
I think that's partly the sort of medium that you're working with. You're working with the grids, and your general instinct is to follow it. Houses aren't laid out like that. Yeah. They're not, and tracks don't tend to work like this. Is much more American.
Yeah.
And let's talk about actually the environment, because it never really tends to discuss the environment. But I assume this area is supposed to be more like Louisiana or the Everglades or somewhere like that.
Yeah, it's in the Grand March. It's on the edge of the Rushmores. And by the way, I love it that this module was very clearly set in Gary Gygax's World of Greyhawk.
Yeah,
and a lot of us at that time had the Greyhawk Gazetteer and the big gigantic map and delighted in finding the location for these things. And there is a little map.
It does give you the coordinates for it.
It does. In fact, it gives you a little excerpt.
It does. It gives you a hex map of the local
there
area.
We are. So there's Orlane, just tucked into the corner of the Rushmores. And it does sort of say that the north of Grand Marsh and Bishel is a kind of temperate, dry, classically European place. But down in the south, there's sort of rain and mists. So I don't know if it's quite as as Caribbean as Louisiana, but we're certainly starting to get to an area of...
My problem is that you can't really have these environments and populate with the monsters that they do. There's a lot of cold-blooded critters here, you know, which just don't occur. I mean, we live in a fen, like a marsh. And, you know...
But we don't have crocodiles.
No, I mean, Jesus. It would be a bit of a problem if we did. You know, this is more like a Floridian golf course. But again, this is like... This is D&D's origin is in this American ideal with these American frontiers.
Right, now I can warm to that topic because you know that I have many thoughts on that. And I do often find myself reflecting that these fantasy towns from the early years of D&D are essentially American frontier towns. They've got a general store selling goods that have been manufactured in some big city out east. This town's got a mayor. I mean, I live in a town of 30,000 people and we don't have a mayor.
No.
But there's a mayor here. So, you know, there's all the signs of a very developed political structure, but you're just on the edges of it next to a great, vast, wild expanse. This is the world of the Crucible. It's not really the world of Gawain and the Green Knight.
No.
Yeah.
This is not European.
No.
This is in no way European because it's far too sparsely populated for one thing.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at, because this is an issue I've got with the geography of the area and the lack of satellite villages and things that are actually mapped.
True.
You know, the distances you have to travel in this module itself are vast.
Yeah, you have to make a 4-day journey later on.
Yeah.
And the implication is you're not going to meet anything but monsters on the way.
Yeah. For 4 days, and even at travelling at the slowest pace that you can conceptualise, that's still about 32 miles, 8 miles a day. If they say it's really hard going,
it doesn't really make sense, does it? No. But let's press on.
We'll come to that.
Nice things about this village. Then we've got the big lake in the middle, which is a distinctive feature. And over on the other side, the massive temple.
I know, it's insanely large.
it's like rocking up to a small village in medieval Europe and finding they've got their own cathedral.
Yeah, it's that scale. It's monstrous. Now I get this place, but it was say that it was founded a generation ago.
Right.
You know, so it's all sprung up within a generation, and it used to be a village of about 300 people.
Yeah.
You know, this village will not accommodate 300 people.
No.
So you've got to imagine this place was probably bigger, or there were more surrounding satellite farmsteads and small holdings to warrant a structure of this magnitude, or it must have been incredibly wealthy and profitable.
Yeah. It's never really explained
No.
just what this temple's all about. I mean,
But it's bloody enormous.
It's vast. Anyway, so into the village we go, and then we get the nice classic layout of towns, peasant farmhouses, constables' quarters, the dairy farm, the weavers, and 2 pubs, inns. Well, 3 if you count one of them's in ruins. Yeah.
But everything has a function.
Yeah.
And everything has flavour text. Yeah. Even an outhouse has flavour text. Yeah. I love that. Yeah. I love that it's got all those nitty-gritty details.
Well, here's one of them. This is an exceedingly run-down structure of wood. Faint traces of a former paint job cling to small parts of the walls, but in some places the bare wood has started to rot. A fenced walkway leads from the road to the back of the house, and horse manure scattered liberally about. A little boy, his face covered with dirt, is playing on the front porch, and as you approach, he toddles out to the road, smiles, and says, "Hi," and presumably adds, "My name's Tom Sawyer."
Yeah, exactly right. But that's so evocative.
It is good.
You know, and the thing is, the standard does not drop. It doesn't falter like with the flavour text. You can proudly read this out stock to your players, and they'll love it. They'll lap it all up. You know, because it answers most of the questions. Yeah. And it always gives this feel, this smell, this vibe to everything. It's always got colour to it. Nothing's bland and like there's a wooden building.
Yeah. Just as a bit of kind of literary context, there's a big theme in American literature of writing about small towns, particularly small towns like this, that underneath the serene surface, all sorts of tensions and perhaps darkness is going on. And probably the signature text is Sinclair Lewis's Main Street from, I think, the 1920s or 30s, but it produced others like Our Town and the like. And Stephen King...
That's exactly what I was going to say. I was going to say, this is really a village in Maine.
Yeah, well, King took that literary genre and said, how would it be if the problems lying under the surface of small-town America, in fact, were vampires and werewolves rather than just alcoholism and adultery? So, I mean, he usually has those things going on too. And this is very much in that vibe, isn't it? On the surface of things, you've got the town and it's got its nice homes and it's got its scrappy homes. And you almost wish there was a little bit more about how the villagers feel about each other. You know, if there's a sort of snobby high-class set and a poor kind of down-at-heel set, and it doesn't quite go into the sort of social structure in the village at all, but you're left certainly to infer it. The livery stable and everything is run down. Other places are quite posh. One other interesting thing just about this as a community that marks it out to me as distinctively American is that very few people seem genuinely to live here. So many people are incomers and have moved here.
Yeah.
Either to retire. I mean, there's an old lady who came here with her husband to retire. It's very much, the American small town.
So this is Florida.
It's Florida.
This is where old people go. Yeah, okay. This is going to become God's waiting room eventually with golf courses and alligators.
That's it, yeah. Flash forward 1,000 years and Disneyland is just over the hill.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay then. So we got the two inns, the Golden Grain Inn and the Slumbering Serpent. And again, they differ, that the Golden Grain Inn looks all ritzy and the Slumbering Serpent looks a bit kind of rough and tumble.
That's what I love about this, because there are so many red herrings in this, and it seeks to subvert your expectations constantly. Yeah. You would think Slumbering Serpent Inn, dangerous place. Doesn't sound good.
Doesn't it say something about a reptile god on the front cover?
Right. And the Golden Grain Inn, that must be a nice place. That's very much agricultural. You know, this is the place to go and drink. No. That is not the case. It's the other way around.
Yeah. Yes, good indeed. Now, here's the thing. When you're going through this town, you mentioned that players are going to lap up these descriptions and want to get involved with the NPCs. And do you know what? I think we are right. That's how players tend to function in D&D as it now is, 40, 50 years on.
Yeah, well, I mean...
What's interesting is the sheer number of times in this module we get a fairly detailed description of what will happen when, I'm not going to say when, not if, the player characters attack the NPC inhabitants.
Yeah, I know. It's a bit of a sad fact, because I think what this module's built for is a more modern interpretation. It's about sleuthing and investigating and questioning, and if someone's got an appetite for that, the GM and the players, that's the most important thing. Both have to have the appetite to do it. Yeah. Then you will have such a scream with this. Yeah. But if you've got more action-oriented players, it's going to get monotonous, they're going to get bored, someone's going to get chibbed.
Yeah. And indeed, some players might simply turn up almost treating the village as a big dungeon and think that their job is to kick down doors, crack skulls and take names. And the module is certainly, from the way that it's written, exists in that point of uncertainty about just what are players supposed to do here. I can tell that Niles intends, I'm pretty sure, the sleuthing.
He does. He has an intention. He outright states his intention. If you go around murdering and roughhousing and otherwise intimidating people, then the village will band together. Cultists and villagers alike, to oust you from their community. Because this is a community that's been originally brought up through hardship with, it says about raiders of ogres and goblins sacking the town. Ooh. So there was a militia.
Yeah, bit of ancient history. Rushmore's the Rushmarsh, just to the south where the reptile cult is located, in Greyhawk ancient prehistory, was the site of the capital of Vecna, the Super Lich and his horrible undead empire. So, yeah. Now, I don't think Vecna lore had been quite as developed as it is now, went back in 1982, but from our point of view now, it's crying out for a sequel that sort of links the Reptile cult to some sort of remnant of the Vecna cult, and ultimately the ruins of Vecna's old fortress somewhere in the swamp. Okay then, so we have the two inns, and you can get into trouble in one of them with the famous picture, big bolt on the head in the middle of the night.
It's a major location. Yeah. We'll revisit that one.
Yeah. You can snoop around. You might find troglodytes lurking in an abandoned location. There are some NPCs you are definitely supposed to befriend. And I think that one of them is the ranger, Alan Claiborne, a 4th level ranger, and his wife Marlika. And their 3 small children. They've been very successful as farmers, and their barn is well stocked with corn, oats, and beans. They're the proud owners of 2 mules. Love the detail.
Does it name the mules?
No.
There you go. That's a detriment to this as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, but he has got a +2 sword. Yes.
However,
what?
It is hidden. It is not on display.
No.
It is in a secret compartment, and he's not going to be handing that off to you.
No. But he will go with you if approached in the right way.
Yeah, because there is space for that later on in the adventure, and it's oddly specific about it. And I was trying to tot up in my head where the numbers come from, but it does make sense that he'll join you on this quest, because he's probably one of the most useful people in this village.
Oh yeah. But he will direct you to the other useful person living in the grove of stately elms.
Ram
or Ramney or
Ramney. Let's settle on Ramney.
Ramney, okay,
yeah,
Ramney.
Rodney.
Okay, so Rodney is an elf.
Yeah.
And he's got a long grey beard, so take that, clean-shaven elves. And he seems to be very, very ancient and withered, and he won't tell you what his class is, but he has this familiar that sits on his shoulder, and he carries an old staff, and I don't know quite what sort of level of disability you'd have to have not to figure out that he's a magic user.
Oh yeah,
first.
Yeah, I know, right? He's just not wearing a pointed hat and curly shoes or a starry robe. But other than that, all signs point to this guy being a magic user.
And he's super duper high level by module standards. He's a 7th level magic user, which
he could basically do most of this module on his own.
He could, particularly once that minor globe of invulnerability kicks in.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Gonna need that.
But the real star of the show is not Ramney.
No.
It's the thing on his shoulder.
Whiskers.
Whiskers the weasel.
Yeah. Yeah, and we have a great affection for swamp weasels.
Yeah, indeed.
They've come up a lot of times.
They have.
They're great cockatrice repellents.
They do repel cockatrices, yes. So Whiskers is the only NPC who's almost guaranteed to accompany you into the dungeon.
Yeah.
He's got 3 hit points, right? And this magic user is going to send his 3 hit point familiar off with you.
Yeah.
Said no magic user ever. But anyway, that's what he's going to do. And he might even come with you if you're prepared to have this old elf man hobbling along at an incredibly slow movement rate.
Which makes him just the ultra skeleton key for this entire adventure.
Yeah.
The only thing he's lacking is a magic weapon.
Yeah. There is some specific advice from Doug Niles here saying, don't turn Ramney into some kind of DM's surrogate who just solves every problem and answers every question and explains every mystery.
Yeah, don't make him a GMPC because your players will have a bad time and you'll cheat yourself in the end.
Yeah. And this raises a bit of a kind of scenario design question, doesn't it? I mean, this is early days of D&D stuff, so nobody's condemning anybody here, but there is a bit of clumsiness in this. We've got this incredibly interesting situation going on in the town, all these different NPCs, and some of them are in the cult and some of them aren't, and you don't know who you can trust. And in the midst of them all is this one very powerful NPC who can basically just step in and fix everything for you if you are screwing up too badly.
Yeah, you can Gandalf the whole situation.
It's again Gandalf it. Thank you. That's it. Puts the G rune. Boom. And I'd like to think if we were creating a scenario like this now, we wouldn't quite be so heavy-handed as that.
No, I think we'd split it if we were going to do it. We'd split it up between minor NPCs and not just have, Gandalf roll in to save the day, to turn the trolls to stone, or save you from the Great Goblin, or, turn up at Helm's Deep.
Yeah. But as it is, it does create a bit of a dilemma, because if you invest Ramney with too much personality, for example, making him cantankerous and rude, as would be very tempting, then there's a very good chance, of course, the players will either ignore him or, even worse, attack him, but they can't do without him. So you've got to make him pretty obliging.
Well, I'll tell you what happened to Ramney in my game.
Go on then.
I'll tell you later. We'll cover that all at the end.
Okay.
Because it didn't end well.
Yeah.
I think that's most of the village, really.
Yeah.
Apart from you've got some good other general stores. There's a money trader, which is super handy.
In the middle of nowhere, of course.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. But he's got a bodyguard, I guess.
It is nice that all the villagers have got a little bit of treasure in modest amounts.
Yeah.
Sometimes hidden in you'll never find it places. But it does give an idea of an economy. And certainly the mayor has got a sum of money which, if you robbed him... I mean,
you'd be set. You're made.
No. Let's just imagine a completely different scenario here where the GM says, I'm going to run against the reptile gods, and everybody creates first-level thieves and assassins, and they just don't bother with the reptile cult, but they loot this town.
Well, if you were thieves, that's probably the only way to play this adventure, as we'll discover later.
Yeah.
There's a couple of other things in the village that I particularly like. Just backtracking a little. The carpenter, I love that. There's a whole setup about the carpenter, right? And he's a cultist. Yes. And he used to produce these really fine, ornate pieces of furniture, and now it's all rough and shoddy. Yeah. But what's super interesting is his wife is peeping through a little hole, and she's got a sword with old poison on it. So it's not going to be as dangerous, but, as soon as, hands are raised... She's going to come out screeching and flailing.
Yes, she will attack hysterically, +1 onto hit rolls.
Amazing. Love it. I think that's great.
Nice piece of detail there.
That's cool. There's also a couple of elves knocking about in the village.
Oh, where are they?
Yeah, they live in the small... I think they're in the small
cottage. The home of 2 elves.
Now, they've been invited by the mayor, right, who, frustratingly, most people won't introduce themselves to.
Yeah.
Because it's in the centre of the village, and most players are more willing to not head to the centre but pick the outsides and work their way in.
Yeah.
But the mayor has a lot of interesting stuff to say, and once you get to a certain point of trust, you'll find that the elves were actually invited by him to investigate the cult.
Yeah. Dorian and Llewellyn. And, initially you've got these 2 elven guys living together in a cottage, and you just think, well, it's a lifestyle.
Don't say it.
Okay. But no, they're sort of special agents doing the same job that you're doing. But as you say, the investigative routes that can bring you to them are a little bit closed off. It doesn't make it quite clear whether they're just going to join in with you. And...
Well, they're there to aid in the investigation, I think, more than anything.
They've got a lot of information.
Yeah.
Whether they're going to actually sign up for dungeon bashing later on is
no, but they're not loyal to you. They're loyal to the mayor, unless the mayor's going to actively instruct them, which it doesn't seem that that's their relationship. They're there to investigate and provide information and feedback to the mayor.
One of them, Llewellyn, though, does have a +1 sword.
Oh, he does. Oh, you want that. Yeah. Oh, goodness me,
or you want
me,
him
do you want it.
with that. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, actually, he's an elf. Yeah. That's going to be real important.
Bring elves. Yeah. That's right, yes. Yeah. Okay, then. The mini dungeons.
Let's start with the pub, the Golden Grain.
Yeah. Now, in a way, the whole of the Golden Grain pub is one big mini dungeon because it's got bad guys lurking in secret rooms and
all sorts of shenanigans going on.
But once you get downstairs,
then it's It's pretty bad. But the Golden Grain in itself, again, a good map of a realistically laid out tavern.
Yeah.
It's not excessively large.
Yeah. I love it that it's got a bunch of circular tables around it,
and
like a coffee shop or something.
Yeah, that's it. But they're so awkward. Which is great. I like that. There's a few dangerous, tooled up lads here.
Yeah.
And they got magic weapons too.
Yeah.
Most people have magic weapons apart from the players in this scenario.
There's going to be a redistribution of those
resources.
There
really are.
There pretty much has to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's reassuring that the building has a use for the cult itself as well, though, right? And they have an MO. They've got a modus operandi for the proprietors to enact.
Yes.
Attempting to disarm and best the characters through guile, separation, using poisons and ambushes.
And here we come to what's probably the most interesting feature of this module for its time, which is that just by being in the village and staying there, certainly if they lodge at the Golden Grain Inn, the players themselves will be targeted by the cult, abducted quite effectively in the middle of the night. There's not much you're going to do about it, really.
They've got a whole section on it later on, and their plans are intricate. They'll use silence, they'll separate you, they'll attack you at weird angles and times using secret doors. This is an operation and a half.
Yeah. So it is highly likely that, and even if you lodge at the other inn, they'll go there ultimately. It just takes them longer to get round to you if you're over at the Slumbering Serpent. But it is highly likely that the player characters are going to wake up in the morning, one morning at least, and find that somebody in their group has disappeared in the night.
Yeah. But it's not without signposting. There's a few houses in the village and villagers themselves that will say they don't trust it. There's queer goings on at the Golden Grain Inn. There's a lot of people coming and going, some odd types, and the whole business has changed. So you are signposted that it's a bad place, and it does give off weird vibes.
I find it interesting that Niles describing all of this makes a point of saying you've got to ask players to leave the room and step away from the table so you can conduct this midnight assault, and that the players who've been kidnapped mustn't tell the other players what's happened to them. And again, this would have been quite ambitious DM craft
in the
early years of the game.
It's hyper convenient now because you've got a phone. You can just text your players at the table.
That's right.
It's great. Great tool.
Then the players who've been kidnapped are kind of held at a secret location in the village for, I think it says 3d6 days.
They're held there for a little while.
So there's plenty of time to track them down and organise a rescue. And I think that's the ideal series of events just in terms of emergent narrative.
Well, the thing about this whole module is it never dead ends. Never dead ends. There's only one point where he says if everyone's charmed, then you can call it there if you like. However, there's all these caveats and these extensions that make this such an interesting scenario. It never just says, well, you've reached the point of terminus, you're screwed.
No, that's right. It doesn't dead end. So ideally, just in terms of narrative, some players are abducted, the other players go into emergency detective mode, find them, rescue them, and in doing so, really unveil the workings of the cult. And that's going to take us to our second location, I think, doesn't it?
A little more on this, actually, to be fair. I mean, the players could instantly turn around and go away because it's extortionate. Have you seen the price list? It's mad. But there's some other couple interesting
Let's have a
things
little
about
look
that
at the price list. I hadn't noticed that.
Yeah.
Breakfast is a silver piece.
That's half a day's work.
Let's have a think about the ale standard. They always used to say that a copper piece is the price of a pint.
Yeah.
And a silver piece is 10 of them. So breakfast is the equivalent of 30 quid, based on the price of a pint round here. 30 quid for breakfast, that's a pretty pricey hotel, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Fancy breakfast, 90 quid. 3 silver pieces.
The other cool thing about this is there is the whole secret area beneath it.
Yeah.
You've got the secret cult room, which leads on to a particularly bloody awful area. Because you've got this secret meeting room. I personally, I'd signpost it a little better, because there are 2 access points. You've got one through the proprietor's bedroom, hidden underneath a rug. There's a trapdoor, right? Yeah. I do a little great escape moment there. Someone knocks over a carafe of water, and you can hear the draining down.
Plug.
Yeah. And then there's the main cellar. Yeah. And it's weird that it doesn't signpost that there's a door there, because it says everywhere is covered in cobwebs and there's smashed up tables and everything everywhere. But I think I would point out that there seems to be an area, just on a basic check, not even on a spot hidden, But that leads into the secret cult's room.
Yeah.
And then there's another door, and you open it, and there's rats. Yeah. But they're harmless. Shocker, right? When does that happen?
Expectations have been subverted.
Yeah. Yep. There's a giant constrictor hanging from a rotten beam in there.
Classic.
That's pretty dope, right? And they even account for it because it's in the cellar, it's cold. So it has minuses to its initiative.
Yeah.
Cool point. But there are 3 ghouls in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. So that's not cool. And there's also a secret treasure room. That that's not slim pickings. It's not nothing. Room 21 with that secret door. Yeah, but there are 3 ghouls skulking about.
You might, if you're lucky, you'll miss the ghouls unless the GM is feeling awkward and wants to send them roaming about, looking for you because you make some noise.
It's okay if you fight them one at a time.
Yeah.
That's okay. But again, they're such tight spaces to fight in.
First level characters as well versus ghouls is always going to be...
Oh, yeah, it's not cool, is it?
Yeah.
It's not cool. But then we have our second mini dungeon. The Temple of America.
Yes. America! And this is a great little place, really. It's really daunting, I think, for player characters to break into because it looks so grandiose.
Well, you immediately get challenged. Yeah. So Misha Devi, if she challenges you, she can just blunt your investigation and tell you, well, this is the entrance to the temple, nothing to see here, off you go, guys. Yeah. Yeah. And some players might be intimidated enough to just turn around and walk out and be like, well, there's clearly nothing going on here at this massive building on the edge of town.
Yeah, yeah. And she's got a whole person, if you want to be awkward about it.
Yeah, she does, yeah. She's no slouch. The next sort of thing that you're going to face, though, when you're breaking into this place is a bunch of nutty monks.
Yeah.
There's the 3 of them. Yeah. But they're not really fleshed out. They just seem to be like monks and evil because reasons.
Each of these cells is occupied by a single evil monk.
Yeah, but what are they doing in there?
Meditating, I think.
Well, clearly, but do evil monks meditate? Do they meditate about reptiles?
Darth Vader meditates.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
And he's just a monk. Disgust.
He's just a monk. Just a monk.
Yeah, you're right. There's we go into sort of standard bad guy mode here, and it's a bit of a shame because something about what this cult is all about might just help you, as a GM, roleplay how these people respond if you try and pretend that you want to join or something. I mean, players will come up with interesting insertion techniques.
Yeah, but they're kind of oath breakers, these guys. So you kind of want to know what the backlash is or what they've been offered. Yeah. That would be an interesting thing to explore, but sadly we don't really get it. So it's up to your interpretation. I mean, I'm all about altering and cannibalising these modules. But it's sad that we don't have any more motivation for them. I know they're only minor mooks, but still.
You can pick up a bunch of curses in there just by messing with the statues.
Yeah, don't piss about religious artefacts. They're still consecrated to a chaotic deity at the end of the day.
True. But it is a little bit awkward because these things are worth 5,000 gold pieces each.
Well, do the dungeon, come back and loot it.
Okay, but it's understandable that players would mess with them. But there's no way that the players are going to get access to a remove curse spell terribly easily. Are there any good clerics knocking around this town?
No.
Not so much.
No. Yep.
Past those statues, you're going to go upstairs. What's upstairs?
So you run smack bang into 8 skellies in room 11.
Classic.
Right? They're not attacking if you use the cult signature facepalm salute greeting, right? With the hand to the head. But the problem is there's no way for the players to figure this out.
True.
So what I would do is I'd signpost it a little better. I'd put maybe bloody handprints on the foreheads of the skeletons, and when you enter the room, I wouldn't have them immediately attack you. I'd have all their heads snap, and then if you make any further progress into the room, then they'll do something about it. But I think they should instantly look at you, because this is a trap, really.
Yeah.
You know?
Skeletons are a pretty trivial problem, even for low-level parties, but there are 8 of them.
Yeah, but it also makes you feel cool to circumvent things like this.
True.
You know? I mean, they're not going to give you any XP. It's great.
So, the main thing up here is goblins.
Yeah,
goblins.
Like, I mean, fine. I mean, it lends itself to the ramshackle structure of the cult. I mean, but what are they? Why are they here? You know, they're too diminutive to be jailers. They can't enforce the cult's will without arousing suspicion, because they're bloody goblins.
I think they've been. It says they've been captured in the dim forest, and now they've been charmed. So they're just
this is why I assume
recruits.
they're ground level guys that have been inducted. But why aren't they back at the ranch? You know, at the main dungeon, because they stick out here. They're not really good for anything. You know, I mean, they eat more than the undead for a start.
It's just a fight for a fight's sake, really, isn't it?
Why not have a road encounter though in the dim forest?
Yeah. But anyway, let's get on to the dark heart of upstairs, which is Abramo, the super cleric, 7th level.
Yeah, he is a beast.
Yeah. How are the players going to deal with that?
Right. Yeah. And hopefully there's 7 of them. Really. But it's interesting because Niles does put a designer's note on running a challenging encounter. You know, because this guy will mess you up.
Yeah.
He offers the advice, if things go badly for Abramo, then he'll retreat and bar himself in the next room. Yeah. I'd take that advice if it goes badly for either party, because it gives the players time to regroup and then come up with a plan.
I think the best thing you can say about his plan is that it's stupid.
Well, yeah.
But
he's mad.
He gives himself prayer, but of course... and then does silence, which basically means he can't cast any more of his spells.
Yeah.
And thank goodness for that, because he's got Snake Charm, Spiritual Hammer, Animate Dead, Cause Blindness. I mean...
Yeah, he's tough.
He could be very, very dangerous, but he chooses to cast a silence spell against much lower level spellcasters and sacrifice the rest of his spellcasting repertoire. Oh, well.
Well, he does cast silence on an object and then throw the object.
True. Which is a nice touch.
Much as Misha Delvey does the same thing. Yeah. If you're captured in the Golden Graining, she'll do the same tactic.
Hopefully player characters will learn from this. I noticed that Abramo also wears his chainmail armour in bed.
He does. Yeah, it specifically states that.
Hardcore.
Yeah, he's pretty badass. He is also insane.
Yeah.
Make of that what you will. But inside his room, you find his prisoner.
Yeah.
Which is
Cyrilli
Finler.
Yeah. And she knows everything.
Which she does, yeah. I mean, you can interpret what you like here about why she's there. But I tend to prefer the fact that he likes an audience. You know, he's an exhibitionist. And he likes an audience.
He just likes to be creepy. He likes to run his fingers through her hair and say, so pretty, and, you know, give off this creepy, pervy vibe.
Yeah, tips Fedora. He's a Redditor.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. What we need, though, is lots of cutscenes to him getting increasingly pervy and menacing with this poor girl.
Do we?
Well...
I mean, up the stakes. Like, let's have a cutaway to this really weird scene.
Yeah, you know, it's like Silence of the Lambs, basically. I mean, he's basically, you know, Buffalo Bill, isn't he?
Yeah, he kind of is that character. So I think, if anything, really play that up. The creepiness, because he's made his own sort of sculptures to the deity.
It is kind of a shame if the players just burst in, fight the guy and kill him, and good luck doing that, by the way.
Yeah.
You almost want them
to... A town encounter before that.
Yeah.
Of him just being super weird.
That's right. Or even for the players to make their way in here disguised as converts and engaged in some big grand shenanigan. Yeah. And then you could have a lot of fun with him and how creepy and weird he is.
Yeah. He doesn't have a magic weapon, though.
He does not.
He should.
Yes.
He should have a magic weapon, if for no other reason than for the players to take it. Because this is an almost unavoidable conflict.
Yes.
You know, if you're following the line of events. But yeah, she does know everything, basically.
Yeah. So,
she knows the name of the villain.
Yep.
The actual reptile god, Explictica Dephilus.
Great name.
Difficult to say.
Yep.
Long sessions, you will mess that up a lot.
Yep.
Yeah, but she knows what they look like. She'll point out that this is an effigy And, you know, sharp players will notice it's a Naga. But you're dealing with new players, so they don't know, you know, one end from the other. It could just be a large snake to them.
Yep.
But experienced players will note that it is, in fact, a Naga.
Yep.
You know.
We've got a downstairs area as well.
We do.
Yeah.
You know,
is it important to go there?
There's a pretty nice magical item down there.
Okay, tell us about that. There's also a maze you can't get out of.
Yeah. This is the maze meme. So it's got no solution as printed, but add a secret door, remove a wall, or just fresh masonry to intentionally block it up.
Is this one of those? Is this one of those? This was done in 4 weeks moments.
Yeah, it is. But you know, it's a tired joke at this point. Yeah. Like, just move on, guys. Yeah. Like, it doesn't have. Just add one.
Yeah, but we are coming to Swamp Goblin's favourite monster. It's armor class 7, 3 hit dice, no attacks. It's a Shrieker.
Yeah, I'm in love with Shriekers. I think they're awesome.
Yep.
I think they do cool things. They're thematic, and they add this weird vibe. Yep. You know, it's not something that you're going to encounter in the everyday, and it's an underused monster, frankly. Yep. You know, or difficulty, I guess. Yes. It's not really a monster, but it's a difficulty. You know, and it deafens you, which is great.
And the treasure.
What it is it's a brooch in the tunnels.
Oh, yes.
And it's pretty good.
Silver brooch of shielding.
30 points of damage.
Yeah.
That's worth having. However, it's in a secret area. It's buried in a box. Right? Just give it to your players. Yeah. They've worked their way down here. They've fought an ogre just a second ago in that maze. Like, just let them have it, guys.
Then they've rocked it with some troglodytes as well, who aren't exactly pushovers.
But this is where you'll find any captured party members in the short term, because this is where the cells are.
So, a happy moment, and I think you're right. Throw in the brooch of shielding, for goodness' sake.
Oh yeah,
don't be
it's
mean.
Not worth it. Yeah, it really isn't.
Okay then, so you have solved by this point the mystery of Orlane, and you know about the cult of the reptile god, and you know what they're doing to people, and you're ready to go out and serve up some justice. We get a little interlude where Doug Niles explains what the cult will be up to, and here's his rather detailed breakdown of who gets kidnapped, and if the players aren't getting kidnapped, then various NPCs start disappearing.
Yeah.
And there's an order for their disappearances.
Yeah, I love it. A module like this relies on the cult itself just not being passive.
Yeah.
You know, why should the nefarious activity stop because a bunch of rat catchers wandered in?
Yeah.
You know, it wouldn't. Yeah. Especially if this thing's ego is so inflated that it is the reptile god.
Quite so.
You know, and it's great that it explores the MO of the antagonists. Yeah. You know, yeah.
So then we're going to set off to the location of the Reptile God headquarters, which we have discovered probably through talking to Cyrilla in the after rescuing her from the temple. But there's a few other NPCs who've been there.
Well, Ramney will, like, you know, probably offer some advice. The elves will probably track down. Yeah. You can revisit a whole load of NPCs.
Ramney's weasel will take you there, if nothing else, right?
Man of the hour.
So man of the hour, weasel power. So you've got to make this 4-day journey. Which really kind of drives home that this town is kind of like on the edge of the Dakotas or something.
It really is. It's the arse end of nowhere, this place. It truly is such a backwater.
And it seems almost a shame, in a way, that you've got to make this massive hike with wilderness encounters, and not particularly interesting wilderness encounters either. I mean, giant leeches in the swamp.
If you were going to do something like this, put a bulette in there, you know, like a land shark. You know, that would be awesome. Yeah. Why isn't that in there?
One of the best illustrations in the monster manual.
Yeah, well, it's on the opening page. You know, it's the first image is one climbing up a tree. This weird armadillo snapping turtle thing with a great dorsal fin.
Hell of a tough for first level characters, but I do think that the journey to the cult doesn't need wandering monster tables. It needs a pre-prepared encounter to start building up this dread.
Put the goblins there.
Perhaps so.
Yeah. Or a party coming back to the town of Troglodytes. You know. Yeah. But it's clear that the cult needs to invest in better local pathfinders or skiffs or magic or the Dutch to get easier access from Orlane.
Dutch did a wonderful work round here. I can tell you that.
Oh,
what did the Dutch ever do for us?
Because of it.
Eventually we arrive at the Reptile God headquarters, and it's underground in a swamp, and most people would see a problem with this straight away, but Doug Niles, true to form, has already foreseen that this is a silly arrangement, and they've built a big dike to keep the waters out, and one of the first things the players can do if they want to is sabotage that.
And flood it.
But that's in fact not a great idea, because it will alert the dungeon denizens that something's up.
Yeah. So and as the water floods in, they'll flood out.
So let's assume that you decide not to do that, and you make your way down the steps into the dungeon level 1.
Okay, so just the layout of the dungeon, I'm a fan of.
Yeah.
You know, it's got great looping paths, interconnectivity, which is what I personally want from a dungeon. You know, I want to explore the nooks and crevices and get really into it.
It's not linear, that's for sure.
No.
There's meaningful choices about direction.
Yeah.
I like it that it's somewhere between the kind of Holmesian and Gygaxian extremes. Just to clarify what I mean here, John Holmes did the sample dungeon in the original basic D&D set, and the white on black illustrations here do remind me of that. And he very much seemed to favour these big underground areas with a lot of tunnels to walk down, long journeys to make, and empty rooms and crossroads and changes of direction. You've got to explore underground. Gygax, in his dungeons, likes everything to be packed together really closely.
Yeah.
With room after room after room, and really something in every room. And it feels
kind
like
of how you build something.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have great spidery houses everywhere. You
and
build partition
Holmes'
walls.
style is not realistic, but it's hell of atmospheric.
Yeah.
And I like that this gives this dungeon some space. There are tunnels to walk down, junctions to come up to and make a decision about which way to go. It's not just, as was with, say, the Caves of Chaos in Keep on the Borderlands module, where it's just boot open another door, have another fight.
It's not that at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is great. I love the entrance into this dungeon, but before that, he actually gives a good piece of flavour text, you know, about smells and feels and the whole environment that you're about to enter into. Everything's covered in mud, everything's wet, it reeks, it's rotten.
Oh, well, let's hear it then. Here we go. The dampness is inescapable, as are the smells of rot, mould and swamp gas. The floor is always wet and slippery, but in some areas a thick layer of mud must be walked through. Yes. And then wandering monsters. Let's say something about that before we get into the dungeon breakdown.
I don't like wandering monsters.
Do you know
Controversially, don't like them.
No, I agree. Clearly in the origins of D&D, where you would go down into a big multi-level dungeon with a variety of projects that you could be doing down there, and with a lot of distance to cover, long tunnels to troop down, wandering monsters existed to encourage you not to waste any time, not to mooch in rooms.
I agree. I think that's very valid. However, I think the problem that they do is they make it a rule as to X amount of turns. So it's like clockwork. You've got something that might show up rather than when the GM needs them to show up.
And it seems to me that down here, you're not just aimlessly bimbling anyway. You're looking for the way down and down and down to get to the Naga and have the showdown fight. I don't think there's any point in punishing people for the time it takes them to do that.
There's enough gribblies in this anyway. You know,
I would far rather say with a wandering monster check that some of the critters in one of the rooms decide to get up and go walkabout.
Yeah.
And then at least if you forge something, it means that you've dealt with a problem early.
Yeah. So the other thing I would say about this dungeon in particular, right, is it says do your wandering monster check every third round.
Yeah.
Right? That's excessive. And now couple that with the fact that you're going through mud and humanoid-sized creatures are moving at quarter speed.
Yeah.
And halfling and dwarf-sized are going at 1/10.
Yeah.
Right? How many wandering monsters before it's a TPK?
Yeah.
And the thing is, start looking at those monsters. Especially on level 2, you've got ghouls, carrion crawlers, just rocking up.
Nobody needs that.
No one needs that in their life. It's just excessive and unnecessary.
I agree.
So, yeah, just not a fan of Wandering Monsters. Yeah. Grognards will disagree. Don't care. The first level, right, as soon as you go down the steps, you can slide, right? And you'll just slide down. Now, you won't take any damage, but Room 2 has got 4 guards in it. 4 lightly armed mooks, and they've got the drop on you, and they can see. Yeah. You know? So you're gonna fall on your ass, and if the person at the back slips, it knocks everyone in front of them over.
Nasty.
Not cool.
Yeah.
So, you know, I love that, though, because it makes 4, you know, pretty basic mooks into a bit of a threat when everyone's in a heap at the bottom of the stairs.
Yep. After that, the dungeon sort of breaks out into different zones. You've got up in the northeast a selection of corridors and small rooms. Over in the west, you've got the Chamber of the Thwog and
it's cool.
And sundriness. Getting down to the south is where things become genuinely strange. Let's take those things in order then.
Yeah.
Starting with the northeast area, which is basically room 7, 8, 9.
It's Mook City.
To 12. It's Mook City, yes.
Yeah. It's full of standard lads. There's 12 of them, though. There's a full dozen. Yep. 8 of them are asleep, and 4 of them are awake. You know, so if you can get stuck in nice and quick, then most of them won't have any armour on.
Yeah.
You know, but there are 12.
Yeah.
So use the terrain and the corridors to your advantage.
Yeah. It does remind me of that classic White Dwarf scenario, The Lich Way by Albie Fury, that again had a band of evil adventurers who were all in their different rooms, you know, doing their interesting things, and you could hopefully pick them off one by one, which wouldn't be a problem, or end up having a massive fight with all of them. That would indeed be a problem. This is an opportunity, isn't it, for thieves and assassins and anybody with high charisma, maybe, to get a lot of problems solved, hopefully, without having to land blows. You've got green slime. I've got to say, when I first was introduced to Dungeons & Dragons, green slime terrified me, and I spent all my formative years as a dungeon explorer absolutely convinced that I was going to go around a corner and green slime was going to drop on me. And here we actually get to find the stuff, but it's not hanging on the ceiling.
It's under the mud.
Yeah.
Which is horrifying, because it's this biological landmine that will just turn you into more goo.
Yes.
It's just not cool. But you can circumvent that. But it's a bit of a 10-foot pole sort of situation, which I've never been entirely keen on. Yeah. You know, if it was on display a little more, I don't think that would hurt.
Yeah. No, it seems there's something rather mean about that, something rather cruel.
Well, you're gonna cause your party to have such paranoia whenever they encounter a patch of mud, and you're gonna drag your way through this adventure once you introduce that. Yeah. If it's a hidden danger.
Yep, we've got a bunch of nice big halls with columns and nothing to find there. Again, a Holmesian touch, big interesting rooms.
I like it.
That you know, you can have a look around. We've got the crocodiles.
Yeah, we got crocodiles. They're cool. They're no slouches, and you fight them in 4 feet of water.
Yeah.
But what it states is they get 1 attack in the water and 2 on land. That doesn't really gel for me. I think if they're going to bite you and death roll you, it'll be in the water, you know. So maybe I'd give them 2 attacks in the water and 1 on land.
I think so.
I think that's cool.
Yep.
I mean, they're crocodiles at the end of the day.
They are crocodiles. You know? That's their thing.
The other thing you've got as well is in the 14 rooms, you've got the lieutenants.
Oh yes.
You've got the officer corps. You know, so you got a couple of thieves. The cleric is absent. We'll find him later, and a fighter, and you can be in for a bad time there. You know, I'm pretty sure they've got magic weapons. So this is an opportunity to make sure loot the bloody bodies, because you're going to need them very shortly.
It's possible to circumvent all of this.
Oh, it is, yeah. Oh, completely. But then you might run into the harpy, which is terrifying.
I've got to say, if you have run into the harpy, you have gone seriously out of your way, and you need to retrace your steps.
Way.
It's a dead end with a room with a harpy in it, and... Well, there's something about this that strikes me slightly of overkill. I mean, here's an adventure where the player characters can be abducted and charmed, and there's a very real risk that the entire party could be charmed. And on top of that risk, we now throw in a harpy who can do exactly the same thing to everybody.
Yeah, this thing will gank the party.
Yeah.
You know, And the thing is,
but
it's designed
not in a new way, in exactly the way we've already come up against. It seems to be a slightly careless design decision.
But you've got Ramney.
Yeah.
He's your get out of jail free card because he's an elf.
Yes, and maybe you've got Dorias and Llewellyn as well.
Yeah, exactly. So you might have other companions that are elves to get you out of this scrape. But if you don't, she's going to come over and blind you. Yeah. And then drag you off to a nest. That's not a great end.
Again, there's a sort of cruelty to it. Which, I mean, there's a ton of treasure here, including a necklace of adaptation, which, again, later on, could be an amazing piece. I just wish it wasn't a harpy. I wish there was any other sort of problematic monster down here.
Well,
even a cockatrice that could turn you to stone.
Yeah.
Which would fit my understanding of this setting.
Yeah, no, I agree. But there is a man-eating weasel. There is a giant weasel on this level.
Whiskers versus the giant weasel.
Yeah. There isn't a passage that says that Whiskers will have a freak out to indicate this, because it's a giant man-eating weasel. Yeah.
The lair of the giant weasel.
Cool, though.
They're particularly horrid things in the Monster Manual, of course, because they've got a very nasty blood drain ability, so... giant weasels, to be afraid of.
The last thing, before we go down to level 2, the choke point of this, really, before you go down... is a Troglodyte guard post. Yeah. There's 6 of them. They're not going to fight like idiots. And Revulsion Odor is a pretty good spice. I love that as an ability. Yeah. To give your more or less evil henchmen in this scenario, really, because they keep showing up. Yeah. A good ability for them to have.
Yeah. No, I do.
Cool.
Let's assume, then, that the player characters have... wandered through the corridors without encountering all the armed guards and didn't tangle with the lieutenants. Yeah. They didn't wander into the Harpies' lair, and instead they dealt with the crocodiles and got themselves to the pinch point with the Troglodytes quite directly. You could get through the first level with only a couple of bruising but manageable fights, assuming that you're perhaps second level characters by the time you've gotten this far. Yeah. But then we're going to descend to dungeon level 2, much of which is flooded.
It is.
Yeah. And dungeon level 2 sort of sends you in 2 different routes, doesn't it?
It does, but we'll just address things generally. Yeah. I think is a good idea. Because you actually find a giant spider here, one of the first things you find. I mean, it's quite late, okay. It's nice to have a giant spider which isn't sat in a room covered in webs.
Got to correct you there, Swamp Goblin. It is a huge spider. The distinction is very important in first edition D&D.
Yeah, fair enough, but it's also not very interesting. No. It missed a trick. Wouldn't it have been cool to have a water spider with those diving bell-like nests and the air pockets all over it? It's an opportunity missed, frankly, just for some flavour. Yeah.
Good. Right, we've got... I mentioned there's 2 routes we can take, and it's broadly speaking left or right, isn't it? Yeah. We get faced with this decision a couple of times. I mean, you could try and press on forward, and you'll keep getting these left-right options. But ultimately, left takes you through a cavern complex and brings you out where the Naga lives, and right takes you through a dungeon complex, a kind of crypt area, isn't it? Yeah. And brings you out where the Naga lives.
If you find the secret door.
If you find the secret door. Bring elves. Did we mention the importance of bringing elves?
Yeah, bring elves. But it should be pretty obvious, that secret door, frankly.
Yeah, I think so. What do you want to say about the monster content?
Right. Okay. You've got a coffer corpse down here.
Remind me, coffer corpse.
I'm super down for coffer corpses.
Is that a first edition? I didn't know.
Yeah, they look like zombies. Yeah. But they're immune to anything but magic weapons.
Fiend Folio? Coffer Corpse. Yeah, a monster from the Fiend Folio, which divides people in terms of its imaginative content, but stands out with the artwork of British dungeon artist Ross Nicholson, who has a rather nice picture.
Straight off an Iron Maiden cover.
Yeah, right. This is Eddie, isn't it?
Yeah, this is
Eddie. Tell me about coffer corpses then.
Right. So your issue is that it can only be harmed by magic weapons. Yeah. Right. And this adventure doesn't directly offer you many. Yeah. Unless you go and take them. Yeah. It isn't a huge deal. unless you've been playing it straight and you haven't fully read the module, and you've only now realised how buggered your players are.
Yeah.
And this thing's got quite an interesting attack as well, in that it grabs you and then chokes you out.
Yeah.
And you can't release this thing from someone unless you've got a magical weapon, because it's just going to shrug it off.
Yeah.
You know? So...
They're difficult to turn as well.
Oh, yeah, they count as whites.
Wraiths.
Wraiths? Good God. That's not cool.
Yeah.
So that's a bit dangerous.
That could be a TPK monster all by itself. And again, we've talked about this being created in 4 weeks. Issues like the Harpy and the Coffer Corpse here, vivid and memorable monsters though they are, make me sort of feel that the threads haven't quite been joined up right here. The presence of that Coffer Corpse really requires there to be one magic weapon that you can get as a treasure somewhere in the adventure. Just on the assumption that maybe you haven't brought Dorias and Llewellyn with you, or you haven't killed certain NPCs and looted them.
Or raided someone's cupboards for a magical gewgaw.
Yeah. The thing's got... it's only 2 hit dice, I suppose, so maybe you could take it down with Shocking Grasp. And
yeah, there's always that opportunity, I suppose. Yeah. But, you got Ramney, always in a pinch.
Yeah.
So, there is always a saviour.
Yeah.
But it's how often do you need to play this card?
Yes, right. Let's assume that we press on and find the Altar of Evil and Garath Primo. I quite like the names here with that weird mixture of Conan, Persia, and Cod Latin.
But Garath
Primo.
Great name. Great name for this guy. He's no slouch either, really. He's the mini boss of the dungeon.
Yes.
The Naga Explictica Defilis is second in command.
Yes. And he, the mini-boss, has a lieutenant
Yep.
lurking in the wings.
Yep.
It's a white!
Yeah, okay. Like, again, there's a severe lack of magical weapons in this adventure. On top of this, level drain is a death sentence for, the level of players that we're talking here. Yeah. Especially as the adventure states, you've got to go to a major town to level up. You cannot do it in all lane.
Just the adventure state?
Yes. You have to go to...
Forget that.
Hohok.
Forget that. The only way you're going to be in a position to get on to deal with this dungeon is if, starting at first level characters, is if you level up after the Temple of Marika.
Oh, yeah. And now let's take that into account, that you have to go to another town to level up. That's a long journey.
Yeah. 4 days to get to the dungeon.
And the cult acts every few days. Yeah. So half the village is going to be empty by the time you come back at second level.
Yeah, no, you don't really have that option. I think you've got to allow people to level up in the village. But even if they have leveled up, then this thing, particularly when the cleric has been flinging a whole person around, people get held, the white comes up and tickles them, and they're not second level anymore. No. It's a nasty encounter.
It's pretty vicious.
Yeah. One of the worst things about it, really, is that the cleric addresses you saying, I've been expecting you. And after the party enters the room, Gareth's sinister assistant will reveal itself to be a white. The players might sort of feel, oh my goodness, why have we set ourselves up for this?
Yeah.
I don't quite know what's to be done about it. There are perhaps other things that his assistant could be. A shadow, the strength training critter.
Well, the other thing to take into account, as you said, that there is a lot of opportunity to circumvent a lot of the dungeon. And this does, in fact, circumvent some other nasty encounters in this dungeon, to be fair.
Well, let's talk about them.
Yeah, so... another thing, you'll find the carpenter's kids and a merchant.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So at last we get a glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
Feels like we're doing some good here. They don't really have a lot of information, but rescuing people in role-playing games is just rewarding.
Yes.
Especially if they're well characterised.
Yeah.
Another thing you've got is we have centipedes, right? Nice and fitting, really.
Yeah.
I like them. Nice gribblies. There are 9 of them. Yeah. And you're caught in cloying mud, and they all have poison.
Yeah.
So...
a lot of saves need to be made.
Yeah, that's not cool. Yeah. We've got a pump room manned by zombies. Very cool.
Good. Yeah.
Right? It's like an empty room, but better.
Yeah.
because the zombies aren't going to attack you. They're going about their business. But it is more or less an empty room that's just got some nice detail.
Some memorable and slightly eerie moments as the zombies slop out the water.
Yeah, it's very cool. Then we've got a mud trap.
Yeah, you're going to be sick of mud by this point in this dungeon.
It's a cool idea. The mechanics are there to induce panic rather than being particularly deadly and kind of trap you, I think, to push on through the dungeon rather than retreat.
Yeah.
Because you might be feeling a bit ropey at this point. And then we've got the Troglair, which is a huge room.
Yeah, with 7 troglodytes, plus some females and mud vipers.
A bunch of those, and they'll throw them at you.
Yeah, and 1,000 troglodyte eggs.
And they're camouflaged as well, so they're difficult to see. All in all, but they're there to harass you, not to fight to the death.
Yeah.
But if you want to make a stand, you're probably going to die.
Yeah, I do hope you've got a kind of thoughtful GM here who will have monsters, agree to let you go as long as you spare their eggs and things like that.
Which is definitely the time for that. Because these trogs don't seem to be charmed.
No.
I don't think. The assumption is that it's a might makes right sort of thing that's going on here. And they're cold-blooded as well, so there must be some sort of kinship, as D&D tends to do amongst these things. Like goblinoids all have some sort of kinship.
Yeah. Well, let's get to the throne room then.
Oh, we're not quite there. We got one more monster, and it's kind of terrible, and I don't really like it. It's the Bone Snapper.
Oh, yeah.
Which is this dinosaur they've got chained up.
Oh, I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, it's basically just an alarm. There's no reason to go near it or fight it. It can't come near you because it's chained to the wall. Put another shrieker in there. It's way cooler.
You just can't have enough shriekers.
No, they're great. Love them. But it's just kind of lame. I mean, how did you get a big-ass dinosaur down here in the first place? And then to chain it up here just seems entirely wasteful. I'm surprised his muscles aren't all atrophied.
Yeah, it's the kind of big, bad, evil guy equivalent of conspicuous consumption, isn't it? Look at the monsters I have under my power. Right!
Like a warlord's hyena.
I want to get on to Explictica Defilus.
Yeah, big boss time.
Yeah.
It's quite the horror.
Yes.
But we do get a blow-by-blow on how to lead into this encounter.
Yeah.
And I'm split.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure I love it. I'm not sure I hate it. It's a bit staged, Without Ramney, it doesn't work. They do say that make sure you get his magic items if he dies. But it's all a bit staged, this whole performance.
So Ramney casts his Globe of Invulnerability, and Explictica Defilus does a fireball, but it doesn't work. And there's a sense of which a big fight is going on between super powerful NPCs with you somewhat caught in the middle.
It's also a bit,
No, I don't know. I like it in a sense. It's like the closing episode of Moon Knight. I mean, the player characters get to do their relatively low-level stuff, and awesome things are going on with very high-level spells being cast, and the player characters get to go, oh my goodness, how cool is that?
Yeah.
I think there's something really sweet about this, and you're not without agency. It's not that you're just standing there while 2 NPCs solve the dungeon one way or another.
It's kind of like being Hawkeye in the Avengers.
Poor Hawkeye.
But it is like that.
But it is.
Yeah. It also suggests that, if the boss isn't tough enough for you, you can put some crocodiles in there. A couple more of those. Yeah, if this isn't tough enough already. And it will just charm you.
Yeah. It can do that too.
Ramney does sort of have a point of, after he's done all the cool stuff, of taking a back seat.
Yeah.
Just ready, just in case someone gets charmed, to solve the situation, to swing in and come to the rescue, because you may well need that.
It does say that anybody the Naga charms will just stand there because the Naga is too arrogant to get its charmies to join the fight on its side. Which is the one concession that Doug Niles seems to make to the idea that you're only second level by this point, and maybe barely that.
Yeah.
And depending on how things went with the white.
True.
So
it's a good concession, though.
It's a good concession. No, yeah. For stronger parties, maybe Explictigo will order charmed characters to fight, or a few more crocodiles or mud vipers around. Gods forbid.
Yeah, no thanks.
Yeah.
No thanks. I would rather, if you were going to make it a much higher level adventure, have a giant snapping turtle in there or something.
Right.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
That would be great, especially if it attacks the boat or something.
Yeah,
or
they're on the wandering monsters for the swamp.
Yeah, but like I'm just saying, in that room in particular, having some, tiny snapping turtle that has grown monstrous in this underground cavern so it can't leave.
There's a nice picture of
that
one.
Would be. Yeah. Oh, look at that. Look at that. Bang! Right there. Yeah. Just what I want. Yeah. One of those.
So let's assume then you went either the crazy way through the caves, sneaked past the zombies in the pump room, negotiated in some way with the Trogs, didn't take on the dinosaur, and you got the Naga. Or maybe you like things the difficult way, and you went through the crypt, somehow dealt with the coffer corpse, somehow dealt with the white and the super duper evil cleric, and have emerged level drained, battered, and half dead into your fight with the Naga.
You find the secret door. Otherwise, you've got to go all the way back through the other route.
Bring elves.
Yeah, bring elves. Required.
So, let's say we've killed the Naga, and I die, and we now get to loot it. And this is the bit which is always bafflingly pleasing for characters, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I love it. I think there's a really good amount of loot here.
There is some variety. Great stuff, including the bag of holding. Oh, yes.
Standard.
Ring of free action. Fantastic.
You're not going to get that.
No.
No, Ramney's going to take that.
Oh.
I know, right? It's probably one of the best pieces of treasure there, but he takes a cut.
Ramney will take the ring of free action and a potion as his share of the magic. This is where the now second level assassin.
Yeah, that's so right. Yeah. Everyone dogpiles Ramney at this point.
Yeah. So everybody who was charmed by the Naga is freed and only has dream-like memories of what happened to them in the interim.
Yeah. But yeah, that's what Niles suggests, that everybody returns to normality with the cult's influence. Only sort of vague memories.
He does say the Troglodytes were not charmed to begin with, so you're right in your assessment.
Yeah, that's what I thought. The danger to Orlane is the power vacuum that's been created, and that the old foes are going to fill that gap, now that it's a smaller and more defenceless community. That's Niles' approach. Yeah. I have a different idea.
Tell me about it.
I prefer the more bleak and traumatised way of going about things. That the memories are still vivid, and it's the townsfolk who've got to come to terms with the horrible things they or their neighbours have perpetrated against them. The destitute now, poorly organised and undefended, and all of this tainted with lingering feelings of fear and distrust. I think that's really compelling.
Yeah. It does, of course, lead you into future scenarios that are entirely kind of domestic and interpersonal.
Yeah, but I think that's good for your downtime to be peppered with that. Yeah. And you go and do a bit of dungeon bashing, goblin murdering, and ogre slashing to defend the town. But then you've got these tense interpersonal dramas. I mean, that's just how I prefer things as a player and as a GM.
I like it. I certainly think one of the first things that the mayor is going to lead the villagers to do is to take Mattox to that temple of Marika and tear it down. And they're not going to want to have any clerics back in town. This is going to end up becoming one of these kind of Nietzschean secular God is dead communities, which, they've seen the worst and most exploitative side of religion, and they've been the victims of it.
I agree, but would that be more destructive? Because she's a chaotic goddess. She's willing to curse people who just lift a carrot. Taking a temple apart, because it's not as if it's been, it's still consecrated.
Are the players willing to take the side of a community that has overthrown its theistic roots and embraced atheism and secularism against the vengeance of a chaotic deity who feels slighted by this? Hey, haven't we just predicted the plot of those Wrath of the Titans films?
Yeah, it's very American, though. It's a great American ideal, It's the citizenry taking up arms and, becoming secular and denouncing.
No. Yeah. Perfect.
It's pretty great.
There we are.
That was the adventure.
That was events against the Reptile God. Yes, against the cult of the Reptile God. What happened when you ran at them?
Oh, goodness gracious me. So... we started out, we'd done, as I say, a couple of bits and pieces before this, and they rocked into Orlane and immediately knew things were not okay. You know, they met the first sort of people, and they were quite standoffish, you know, and they were like, this isn't right, you know, they won't let me in the house, they usher their kids inside, you know. Then they meet the constable, who makes these sort of empty threats or you know, these intentions of, you know, fuck about and find out. These sort of overtures of conflict, if you prefer that cut or take. Yeah. So then they get into it and they start investigating, because I gave them a blank map. You know, I just left the numbers on it and I put a column down the side for them to fill in the names of the places as they went to them. You know, and I gave them some highlighters to say, this is a business, this is a residence, this is destroyed, you know. And they had a great time painting the map, effectively. And they did loads of investigation, and they pretty quickly twigged that the Golden Grain was a bad place, and made sort of fast friends with the Slumbering Serpent, made that their power base. Now, they spent quite a while, you know, several days knocking about in the community.
Well, how many sessions was that?
It was only a few sessions, you know, of the actual investigation in Orlane. But they spent a lot of time, you know, waiting, watching, you know, investigating. They made contact with Ramney, but they were quite standoffish with everyone. You know, they were really suspicious of absolutely everyone. You know, they didn't find an ally. You know, they didn't introduce themselves to the mayor. It was a bit of an affront when they actually met him, because he's like, you know, it's been 3 or 4 days, guys, and you didn't think to introduce yourselves. So they put everyone's backs up. And the reason I have such a fondness for the Carpenters is because they basically shook the Carpenter down, and then his wife comes screaming out the back end, you know, with a falchion to chop him up. And but my players were really good. They didn't murder hobo anyone. Right. Non-lethally knocked them, and they turned the Carpenters into their prison, effectively. Right. So they were trying to gather and round up anyone they could suspect. Yeah. You know, working with the cult.
I could see how this scenario could be a murder hobo's graveyard, couldn't it?
Oh yeah. You know, but they were pretty cautious about it. And they didn't want to reach the tipping point, which I feel this adventure's got, that once you engage one of the mini dungeons, the jig is up. You know, a day or so afterwards, the cult's going to realise you've started punching holes in its power structure, and it's all going to come down, you know. So my players went and kicked the hornet's nest with the Temple of America and the inn, you know. However, what they then did was sat back. So they did the 2 mini dungeons and sat there. Waiting for the cult to make its move. Right. And it made a move in quite a dramatic fashion, because they'd kind of made friends with the mayor and unmasked a lot of the cult. So what happens is the dungeon came to them. It came in sort of force. You know, because they spent a week just sat there waiting. You know?
That's more than the 4 days needed to...
because Ramney as well, in the meantime, once they'd started making obvious plays, the constable and a group of cultists took Ramney out back and, you know, in his bed and strung him up from the stately elms. Ah,
right.
So
it makes things more difficult. That's one elf down.
Right? You know, but they ended up consolidating their position, and it ended up in just this great conflagration. You know, the town got gutted by fire. Half the citizenry were killed. You know.
Never got to the dungeon then?
No, it was a total mess. They did get to the dungeon eventually. But half of that had you know, already come to them. So it was interesting, but it was just about me being flexible with what they could do, and me reasoning, how is a cult realistically going to react to this? You know. It was messy. They had a whale of a time, though. They had a scream. Right. And so did I. It was great, because every time something happened, they would just keep throwing spanners in the works. You know, and it would be a new issue for me to overcome and be like, well, I can't really play with you with kid gloves all the time. Yeah.
It's an interesting thing that Doug Niles went on from doing this work with TSR to writing novels, many Dragonlance novels he did. You can see that he's a writer from his own text. But he also went on to work on the Top Secret not the original Top Secret role-playing game, but Top Secret SI, the kind of remake of him. And you can see that he's clearly got a fascination there with the kind of espionage angle of things, infiltration and investigation, rather than classic dungeon version.
I know nothing about Top Secret. That's great. I should investigate that, to be fair.
What we should probably do is have a look at Top Secret and its fascinating first module that came in the box set.
Oh, right.
For another time.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So, some closing notes for me. I mean, I was a player in this module all those years ago, and we stayed at the wrong inn and were kidnapped and ended up basically we all got charmed, so we didn't get to experience the end dungeon either. But of course we were doing this with a DM who was himself just another 17-18-year-old kid, so it demands a lot. It demands a lot of the players. They mustn't be too hard-headed and murdo-hobo-ish, but neither must they be too paranoid and unwilling to make allies and share confidences. The DM has got to be highly flexible and responsive to what the players do, but has also got to hold back, because you can, of course, squish the players with full justification very easily. I think you've got to bear in mind the 4-day journey and 4 days back again.
You
for
really
communication between the cult and its HQ. And I'd be inclined to play up the relative independence of the evil cultists at the temple, who it doesn't quite explain what their relationship is to the reptile god itself, but presumably they don't think the reptile god is a god. They know it's a Naga. Quite what their agenda is, I mean, they're clearly encouraging all this to happen, but where they stand religiously and morally in it all is something that the DM is free to
My assumption is that they've been given a base for power. You know, the ogres and goblins have run this sort of area for a long time, and now they've been inducted as evil minions. They can raise their young in relative safety. You know, they can come out of the swamp. So I think that's what they're looking for, really.
But I'm just suggesting I wouldn't make the America cultists necessarily inclined to go and bring in the Naga to solve their problems. Just to suggest that there's some sort of division at work there, some sort of rivalry, or at least a sense of a chip on the shoulder. Is something that the player character might justify giving the player characters a bit of a leash without bringing down the wrath of all that's scaly on their shoulders. A tough dungeon at the end, but a nicely designed one.
Oh, it's great. I love it because it's pretty unique. You know, it's got a lot of environmental difficulties, which I quite like. And a great variety of monsters. You know, you don't kick down too many doors and find the same things. You know, there's centipedes and crocodiles and troglodytes and evil spear carriers and zombies and
far more interesting than the Caves of Chaos in I Keep on the Borderlands. More interesting in many ways also than the underground section of the village of Hamlet. We can say then that this is a gold-plated classic from the Silver Age, so we say, of TSR. If the Golden Age is those original little sepia sort of modules against the giants and the Tomb of Horrors and the like, those Gygax led early modules, and this is the second generation of D&D modules coming in the 80s with various more interesting positions and concepts than the here's an underground place that needs you to go and wreck.
It had matured. You know, it matured at this point and realised that you could do more than just a dungeon bash.
And this is Niles, isn't he? He was somebody who had been converted to D&D in the late 70s and was bringing his experience of running the game for a couple of years to module design, rather than somebody making it up as they go along.
Also, his expertise in language. You know, he was an English teacher and therefore well versed in text and writing and how to structure things and narrative. So you're bringing that into it as well.
It's exceptionally clear.
Oh yeah, it is. Yeah. It's great. You know, there's not a lot of grey areas as long as you read it. In this module. You know?
So what would you do with this module now? I mean, the obvious option is to go classic, find a copy of the first edition AD&D or the retro clone like Osric and run it as it was written, with the sort of characters it was written for. And you know what? You would not have a bad time.
No.
It might feel a little old school crunchy in places, what, another fight? But you would enjoy it, I think. But does it have some usefulness? Could it be adapted for a slightly different end, given what role-playing games have turned into?
I suppose it entirely depends on the system that you want to run it in. If you want to run it in modern Dungeons and Dragons, in 5th edition, what you've got to realise is the tools that players have at their disposal. They've got a lot of utility abilities. They're generally more powered up.
Doesn't that make it better, actually?
Well, it does, yeah.
Yeah.
No. Like, I didn't do... Well, I did bits and pieces to it when I actually planned to run it until they, tore out the pages and made paper aeroplanes. Yeah.
But wouldn't it? So 5th edition player characters would in fact be in a much better position to be the sort of adventurers, perhaps, that this module envisages them as being.
Yeah, you don't need to rely on crutches at that point, which is why I partly did away with Ramney. Yeah. I was able to do that because I didn't have the same power constraints. I didn't require him to run in and save the day. Yeah. My players were pretty capable of doing that themselves, and they were second level players, 4 of them. Mm-hmm. So it seemed more or less, the balance seemed on the nose. Yep. And at the end of the day, mechanically, it doesn't really matter for me, a lot of this, because actually the writing and the investigation is system agnostic. Yeah. It's actually about you putting in your own work.
And you know what? This would lend itself very well to RuneQuest, Glorantha, as a location, cults and remote communities and all this sort of thing. You could do it with Call of Cthulhu, for goodness sake. Yeah. In any time period. I mean, it would be almost tempted to use Call of Cthulhu, but continue with a medieval setting.
Yeah, I agree. That would be quite cool.
Turning up as the reeve and bailiff and a monk from the feudal lord, wanting to know why his taxes haven't been paid or something.
Yeah. But that would give a great reason, to investigate the village as well. The local authorities and power structures leaning on you as influential people to go and deal with this.
Tempting also to use it for World of Darkness, Werewolf the Apocalypse.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool.
Great for that, because clearly you're up against the worm here. Or even Vampire the Dark Ages, if this is going on in a territory where you as vampires are used to having as your own little playground, and here comes a rival supernatural force.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good as well. It's just easy to adapt to most things if you're just a little creative with it. You could do it like, running any sort of sci-fi system as well as this backwater. I mean, it would probably be a banging Traveller scenario.
Traveller, that's it. You land your ship just beyond those trees.
Yeah, that's it. Right.
Yeah, Prime Directive, don't tell him
that's
to
the dungeon, isn't it? Yeah. That's how you get your ship. It's the dungeon.
Yeah. Very good. Yes, the dungeon is a grass spaceship.
No, it's definitely the Temple America.
It's a grass spaceship.
Yeah, because it's so out of place.
Sign me up for that one. Right, and we've got to sign out.
Yeah, no, that was a banger. Love that module. My favourite, 100%. Highly recommend. Play it.
Goodbye.